All right, we should be good to go.
Right. Morning, Jay.
Morning.
We're almost afternoon this time around. Good to be with you as always.
Likewise.
Different day. So I thought we'd start this session before we get into the crux of what I put down for our discussion this morning, which I've kind of labeled the pillars of our Encore life. I'm finding out that I'm seeing a little trend or a frequency of key moments in this phase of life. Kind of, I'm labeling those pillars kind of a clarity, control, and what was my third? Comfort. That's it, the most important, comfort. So I thought before we talk to that, given where we've been these last couple weeks with our market, and not to make this a public service announcement, but I thought it kind of blends in a little bit to our discussion today on these pillars, especially the comfort and clarity aspect of living our lives. Maybe start with a little disclaimer. This is not necessarily meant to be any financial advice. Obviously, anybody listening should, speak with their financial advisor. This is more a little bit of a father to son conversation that we have from time to time, and just so happens you're, a life planner, financial advisor. And just to address a little bit of around the comfort pillar, obviously there's the necessity to help control your stress and anxiety. And over the last couple of weeks, we can't help but have a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
I know we always say, hey, put out the noise, don't pay attention to the news. We've been through this before. But I wanted to address it a little bit because I think that is true. I mean, we've lived through moments like this over time.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, I thought I might just talk about the few things that happened, at least through my lifetime and a little bit of your lifetime, albeit you were quite young,
Mm-hmm.
very similar to today. And not that this really gives us any real sense of comfort, because I still think there's a huge difference between what I'm going to recite as events that happened over the last couple decades versus where we're at today, simply because, again, from my mind's eye and my little bit of economic background and academic experience, this is different than the past, mainly because this is self-inflicted. And I also see one very different piece that I'll talk about in a moment, but I just wanted to say that to that point of, we shouldn't be too concerned because we've lived through something like this in the past. Here's just the, running ticker of some of that I've lived through. In the 80s, I've labeled it the 80s inflation, where, double-digit inflation we lived through,
Mm-hmm.
which was, wreaked havoc on the markets as well during that time. Of course, we had the Black Monday of 87. We had the Friday the 13th mini crash of 89. But again, how old were you in those times? 5, 6, 7
Mm-hmm.
years old?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of crazy to think about these moments and where you're at. And then a big one, at least where I wanted to have a little discussion with you on, is like 2007 to 2009, the bear market, where the S&P lost 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, during that time, 2007, 2009, I was 51. And although living that time, I didn't really concern about it that much, even though we had that kind of loss, because I was still quite a ways from retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Versus where I'm at now, and many others who might be, watching and listening in today. If you're in retirement, we don't quite have that turnaround, even though we've talked about we've got 10, 20 years ahead of us. Because I look at it and go, okay, if I lose, S&P loses 50% today, if something similar happens to where we're at now, there's that still general discussion I think people need to have, at least I know I need to have from time to time, is a comfort of, all right, you lose that, but you're going to gain it. Just as we saw 2 weeks ago, we lost a nice chunk.
Mm-hmm.
We had the pause, which I think was self-made to create a little bit of inside trading, but
It wasn't for the inside trading. It was to stop the bond market from rolling over.
Right.
But yes, people made money on it.
Yeah, exactly.
The tweet of buy was to cover the insider trading that was going to go on, but he didn't do it for the insider trading. That was the cherry on the top for the people who knew.
Yeah. Well, tomato, right?
No, it's different. Insider trading is to benefit his cronies, which I'm sure they did, but from everything that has been shared, the bond market rolling over was what led to the pause. Because the stock market, because it's pricing information and it changes, like the stock market going crazy is uncomfortable, but it sorts itself out. Like the spread of the stock market is not the same as the bond market.
Right.
The reason for the 08-09 crisis was not the stock market, it was the bond market. It was the mortgage bonds packaged up. So if you start having bonds exploding and rolling, that's where the contagion comes in. So it's all fine as long with the stock market being down 10% in 2 days, but once the bond market starts signaling, that's the wake up call. That's the warning that, hey, things are going a little too far. Maybe you need to pause. Maybe you need to change something to prevent the bond market. So that 90-day reprieve was, I think, and I'm not the only person who says this, and I listen to a lot of things and read a lot of things. The consensus is the reason for that blink, the reason for the pause was not because of what's going on in the stock market, it's because of the bond market, because the bond market has real implications on the system. That's why comparing now to 2008, 2009, me personally, from an advisor standpoint, I'm nowhere near as scared as I was in 08 and 09. Now, 08 and 09 was my first time dealing with the financial crisis because I started in the business in 2004. So that was the first time that I was having to tell clients, stay the course. The best thing to do is stay invested. Don't overreact. We don't want to miss the recovery. And after an extended period of time, there were nights where I was wondering, am I telling them the right thing? Not was I lying to them. I told them what I believed. I told them what I was taught. But what I believed and what I was taught, was that right? And yes, it was. So the reason I think 08-09 is way scarier than what it is now is 08-09 was a financial system issue. And you could argue that was self-inflicted as well by behavior and policy and mortgages and all the stuff that had gone on. Like that was caused by people buying houses they didn't need to buy because interest rates were so low, mortgage companies letting going on, investment companies packaging these bonds up, lying about what was in there. Like that was self-inflicted by a lot of people. This one's self-inflicted by one person. And while I don't really particularly appreciate it, I don't really particularly understand the desire to go back to an age of manufacturing when the biggest margins that our businesses make are not in manufacturing. And the reality of it is, if we bring manufacturing jobs back, they're only going to be replaced with robots. So it's not like it's going to help people who are looking for work. But it can turn on a dime because one person can say one thing and change one thing and it all comes back. And so while yes, it's scary in the moment, and I try to be empathetic to the way people feel, and at the end of the day, I honestly do believe stay the course, don't change. It's why you have a diversified portfolio. I had this conversation with a client yesterday. She was all kind of upset about what was going on, doesn't like the policies, like all the stuff that all of us feel. Like I don't think anybody doesn't feel this. And I asked her, I said, well, what do you think your portfolio's down? And she said, I don't know, I'm too afraid to look. Like I hear everything's down, like doom and gloom. I said, how much do you think you're down? She's down 4%. 4%. With shit hitting the fan and the American economy on crumbles and Trump doing crazy things, 4%. The amount of stress that left her when I told her she was down 4%, because she has a diversified portfolio. We're not taking on too much risk because she's in retirement. We have enough growth to give her what she needs, but not more than she needs. We weren't being greedy with her portfolio. And the majority of diversified portfolios, 60-40, 70-30, are nowhere near down what the overall indexes are. You know, people are hearing the NASDAQ is down 20%, 30%, NVIDIA is down 30%, Apple's down 30%, whatever the numbers are, the big numbers. And they automatically attribute to that means the whole stock market or the whole portfolio is down that way. Right. And it's not if you're diversified. The reason you're diversified is to protect against the downside. It doesn't mean you escape the downside, but historically, it reduces the downside. It also reduces the upside. So for the last 10 years, the international holdings that are helping us this year have been a drag on my client portfolios. But I didn't know when things were going to turn. And I've been waiting since 2010, 2011 for international to come back, because the argument coming out of the great financial crisis was, oh, Europe is 2 or 3 years behind the U.S. coming out of this. So you want to be in Europe. You want to be in international because they're trailing the U.S. And they never caught up. This year, International is doing well because of the chaos here right now. And I would argue it's not chaotic. Like I hear I had a voice note that I wanted to record, and I can't get it to be in a way that I can put out that I don't fear people are going to take it the wrong way. But like I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, great guest on, and they're just talking about the chaos and all of this like doom and gloom. And while yes, things aren't perfect, they've never been perfect. And you can identify some of these things as chaos. If you step back into your own life, the majority of us, even if things aren't perfect, the majority of us still have good lives. Like, if it's so chaotic and so bad, go live in another country. Go live in a third world country. Go pick another time period. I thought about this. I was watching Gladiator 2 on the way back from Omaha. You want to know chaos? Go live back in the Roman Empire where there's no technology, no communication. You don't know when a Roman army is going to come through and rape and pillage everybody there. Like, that's chaos. Like, even those of us that aren't doing good, most of us wake up with a roof over our head. Most of us wake up with food. We may not have everything that we want, but we wake up with all these great things. And because there's a little bit of noise that goes on, that will impact some of us, but we adapt. Like, just because we're alive and just because we've saved well and we've invested, that does not guarantee us that everything's going to be a smooth ride. Like, because we're here today, it doesn't guarantee that we get to do everything that we want to do. And if there's a period of time where, let's just say the stock market does nothing for 10 years and the economy quits growing, does that mean that your life stops? No, you adapt. Like, you think back to the people who made it through the Great Depression. No one would choose that, but you adapt. And then you realize what really matters in life. And all of this stuff we're afraid to lose is all distractions. And I mean, I love things. I love material things, but they don't define my happiness and my good experience I have on this earth. Take away everything. As long as I have my family and have love, like, yeah, things might be more comfortable and we could do more things if we had more, but we don't need that. Those are all luxuries, and we're spoiled to think that these luxuries and these things are God-given rights that we all should be entitled to. We're lucky to have them, and we should do everything in our power to be able to continue to have those things, but they're not promised. It's not guaranteed. And at the end of the day, they can be taken away, but that doesn't take away your ability to live life. So I just hate everybody using these words of chaos and things are in shambles, and that doesn't mean to turn a blind eye to the injustices that are out there and the things that aren't perfect. But it's never been perfect. And this time isn't different. The only thing that's different is the narrative of the story, but there's always been shit going on. There's always been people who have been homeless. There's always been wars. There's always been injustice. That will always happen because humans end up being flawed. And I don't think that you turn a blind eye to it. I don't think that you don't do things to try to make it better. But at the end of the day, letting that cloud your vision of your life, that guarantees your life is going to be miserable. And so you can be aware, you can support, you can do things to help those things. But at the end of the day, don't define those as chaos. Those are just imperfections. And even though imperfection's not a necessarily positive word, I think from a frequency energy standpoint, it's much higher on a level of consciousness than chaos and shambles. And I think words matter, and that shapes your perspective. And if everybody is saying the world's in chaos, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we do get chaos. Mm-hmm. If we say, hey, things aren't perfect, and here's what I want to do to change it, the only way you change the negativity and the chaos and the shambles is with love. And you can't operate from a place of love when you're living in pain and fear and hate. You can't be at both. It's right. The yin and the yang. You can't be both of them at the same time. Like, they're both existent and they need to exist for each other. But if you really are serious about making the world a better place, defining it as chaos and focusing on all the negativity and letting that make your world that is not going to fix anything. It won't make your life better, and it won't turn the things that are going on. So I don't want so the fear of me saying all that is I don't want it to seem like I think the world is perfect. It is far from it. There are causes that I want to see be better and support. And there's things I do to try to help that. But me being negative about it and just talking about how horrible the world is and things are going to end that doesn't help anything. And it just makes my life miserable. So, like, yes, this is not what any of us would have chosen for the beginning of 2025. But even with if all of this distraction, all of this noise, all this uncertainty, and the feeling of fear and concern is all warranted. Like, feel that, process that, but then don't let that be the determining factor on how you act and what you do. Because part of it could be that may be what they want us to do. They can control us by fear. Right. Like, I don't know what the ulterior motive is and why what the grand picture really is for doing all this. But I still think that things will work themselves out. Markets work themselves out. It's a discounting mechanism. It takes in information, adjusted prices. So we got a bunch of new information that it wasn't, and that just shows you that no one expected this. So if you think that you had the great idea at the beginning of the year to move to cash because you knew this was going to happen, you didn't. Because if you did, you would have done it. But the reaction of the market show you that nobody expected this because it wasn't priced in. That's how you get 10% down in 2 days, is no one expected it. It wasn't even on the radar, right? Because otherwise it would have been priced in. It would have been a 2 or 3% decline because we knew this was going to happen. We figured this was going to be the case. But the levels that it went to, no one expected it. And then if you were one of the people who got out of it, again, fear, I understand, I'm retired, I don't have as much time. You missed a 9% pop the next day. And now the next day went down a few percent, but still, right. Like the way things move today, you can't afford to get out. So I think the first plan is you already had a plan in place. You already had a diversified portfolio. And truthfully, financial advisors, we make the bulk of our value in times like now. Like, we can help our clients along the way with tax planning and investment selection, those types of things. But keeping people invested when it's scary and it's all doom and gloom is where you prevent people from locking in hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses that they will not make up. Day to day, the losses will be made up. And we'll be, there's nothing to say that we won't be positive by the end of the year. Like, it's not guaranteed. A lot of talk about recession. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But guess what? Recessions are normal. Go look at the business cycle. A recession is a part of the business cycle. We have them every few years. We haven't had a real recession for a while. And not every recession is 2008, 2009. We go through recessions where, yes, people lose their jobs, businesses slow, things, aren't necessarily ideal. But then because there's that step back, everything levels, businesses get back to where they're profitable again, the market gets all that in, and things go back forward. And if you're fearful of the worst case scenario, that this is the end of the United States, what are you going to do? Where are you going to put your money? Like, there's no solution for that. So I think at the end of the day, you have to do what you feel most comfortable with. I don't know of any situation where reacting to the news and getting out of the market has ever been the right thing to do. It's nearly impossible to time the market. And to time the market, you have to time it twice. When to get out and when to get back in. So if you're going to get out now, you've already experienced a decline this year. And then psychologically what's going to happen, because I've seen it, is that when things recover, you don't trust it. You're waiting for the next shoe to fall. This is a dead cat bounce. And before you know it, the markets are up 20%, and now it's time for another correction, and you just can't get back in. You get paralyzed. So, yeah, it was scary when your portfolio went down 10% if we got to that low, but it came back. And I told my clients, as I said, if I did not believe in the markets and things coming back, I would retire. I'm not going to advise my clients to do something that I don't believe in. And that's not the case. So how do you manage all of that? If you don't have a plan already, it's never too late to start. And then you can devise a plan for, okay, here's how I'm feeling. What are some things that I can do to make me feel a little bit better without totally getting out? And maybe you do sell some. Maybe you sell some and get to a level that maybe you feel more comfortable with. Maybe you identify areas that you can curb spending on. Like, that's another option. Not necessarily the ideal, but again, doing all the things we want to do is not a God-given right. It's a privilege. So sometimes we have to cut back on privileges because things out of our control are happening. And you just adapt and you get through it. So anyways, that's my rant.
No, that's a good rant, because that's what I actually wanted to have us kind of do with this little segment or prelogue, if you would, to the real crux of our talk today and the pillars of the Encore life. Just again to indicate that, yeah, we have lived it. Like I said,
I just want to reiterate one more time.
Yeah.
All of the feelings are completely normal. and are warranted. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't feel those things. I just don't know of a situation where acting upon those feelings when it comes to financial planning and your portfolios is the right thing. Because even in retirement, you said it, even in retirement, hopefully you still have 20, 30 years ahead of you. That's no different than when you were earlier in your career, because you weren't thinking about, I have 60 years of life. You were thinking, I have 30 years till retirement.
Right.
Well, you have 30 years that this money needs to last you. So, part of constructing portfolios for retirement is having 18 months, 2 years worth of income needs, if you're drawing upon it, in bonds and conservative things. So, okay, the market's down, my portfolio's down, but I'm not drawing from the part that's down. Those stocks have time to recover. And when they recover and when they get positive, we will rebalance, we'll replenish the funds that we used in the bonds to live off of. We get back to equilibrium, and now we've got our bonds for when things are bad. And like last year, instead of taking from bonds to give people income, I took from the stocks when they were up. Because just as losses on paper aren't realized, you don't really realize them until you sell it, your gains aren't realized either until you sell them too. So when the market's up, let's take some of the gains off and we'll reserve our safety net for when we need it. And now that we need it, it's there. These have fallen, they have time to recover, and we rebalance. Right. So that's how you navigate through it. It's hard to do it by yourself. So again, the feelings are warranted. They're real. You should feel them, but I don't think you should act on them.
Right. Okay. That's good. That's what I
and
wanted
stop
to
watching news.
Yeah.
Stop watching whatever you want. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever it is you watch. One of the worst things that was ever invented was 24 hours news, including 24 hours sports news.
Yeah.
Because they have to fill the time. And nobody knows anything. No one knows what's going to happen. And anybody who does know isn't going to come out and tell everybody, because they're going to be acting on it for their best interest.
Right.
So it's all hearsay, and every story that is told, our minds are imaginative. We are all creative. We can see how that might play out. And the reality of it is no one knows.
Right.
And history has shown us that we end up making it through and we end up being okay. We don't know how it's necessarily going to happen, but why make that ride any more miserable than it needs to be, because you're running through all these scenarios that probably aren't going to happen. And you only have so much time on earth in this life. Choose to make it as happy and as fulfilling and loving as you can, regardless of what is going on in the outside world.
Okay. Very good points. And just to wrap it up, like I said, we talked about a few things, but just a couple more of these that we've lived through so far, just to illustrate exactly what you've spoken to. Obviously, I just talked about the bear market, 2007 through 2009, but in there, of course, was 2008 where we had the financial crisis. 2015 and 16, we had a big moment of sell-off. Of course, the last thing we had was COVID. Mm-hmm. And like you said, a lot of those things can never...
2018 had it too. 2023 was a rough year too. 2023 was the year that even the bonds were down. So your 60-40 portfolio was down across the board. But if you stayed invested, no, maybe it's 2022. And then you got to experience 2023 and 2024, which were back-to-back 20% years on the S&P 500.
Yeah.
So yes, the whole way that the market works, if you look at a chart, it zigs and zags. But historically, which is not a guarantee of the future, it zigs and zags up and to the right.
Yeah.
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as I said, the point here was to just address where we're currently at, and specifically for those of us in this phase of life where we, even though we may have our 20, 30 years ahead of us, mm-hmm. as you said, we're human and we fear a little bit of that uncertainty. We look at it academically and go, geez, I'm down whatever this amount is, even 4% down. Mm-hmm. That could be enough to make people very concerned. Because again, once you're 4% down, when that bump comes, you're 4% less of getting that bump.
No, you need more than 4% to get back to 100.
Right. So
but
I'm just saying, I would argue
if a 4% decline, and I know that. So another thing that you deal with clients is like law of large numbers. 4% on 100,000 is different than 4% on a million, is different than 4% on 10 million. So there's also this psychological aspect of the dollar amount that they see. But regardless, and I don't mean this to be insensitive, but if 4% decline spooks you, you shouldn't be investing. Because the market goes down 10, 15% every year, multiple times.
Right.
So like that. But what my point of sharing that story was, she hadn't even looked. She assumed she was down 25%. She didn't tell me, but I'm assuming she thought she was down big.
Yeah.
Because of the news and what other people are saying. And the reality of it is, the news fear sells, and their whole purpose in life is not to educate us or bring us accurate information. It is to sell advertising dollars. Fear sells. They pull you in on that. So that is their incentive. Other people, they just regurgitate things they heard somebody else say, and they don't even know. So like, it's easy to get caught up, but at the end of the day, our perception, her perception of the world was creating this stress and uneasiness that wasn't her reality. I mean, it was becoming her reality because that's what she was experiencing, because that's what she thought. Right. But her actual reality of what was really happening was nowhere near what she thought. And it's hard not to do that in anything, whether it's money or other things. But at the end of the day, I think that's where, I talk about spirit, mind, body, and money, like the mind aspect of it, of like controlling your mind and you setting what you think is important and you setting the direction you're going. And I think optimism always wins. I refuse on anything that I do to contribute to this negativity of the world. Because again, there is imperfections, there are things going on, there's things that need to be improved. But name another time in the world that you would want to live in. You might say, oh, the 80s were great, the 90s were great, but there were a lot of problems back then.
Big problems.
And there were things that we have today that are way, like, do you want cancer today or do you want cancer in the 80s? Like, you wouldn't go back. And we've talked about this before.
Right.
Like, it's easy to feed into that. And like a moth to a flame, we are drawn to that. So it's so easy to go in. Misery loves company, but it doesn't do anybody any good. And it impacts. You can identify the flaws. You can know that they're there. You can not like them, and you can still have a positive outlook on life. And I just think so many people are losing that positive outlook. And to me, that's scarier than the markets.
Yeah.
Because if everybody's feeling that way, the collective conscious begins to steer what happens. And if everybody's seeing chaos, then we get chaos. Yeah. If everybody's feeling hatred, then hatred is there. There are pockets of it, but I don't know, man. I walk down Fisher's, people are smiling, saying hi, they're spending money. If you weren't watching the news or reading the news, you never know all the stuff that's going on. And again, I don't want to be insensitive to people who are going through it in the moment, because there are people who are. But even in that moment, there's positives if you can find them.
Yeah.
And easy for me to say when I'm not in it, but I know people who have been there. I know people who are there now and are still finding the positives. And that is what leads you out of it.
Exactly.
I took the first set of film for that. Let's get to your pillars.
Well, that's what I said, even though, like we spoke before, we come into this, I have a little outline agenda. Even what I started as my outline, I've revised it a little bit for today, because yesterday I put out another Terry's note, and some of the comments that I had made and want to talk about today are different in my mind after I wrote yesterday's Terry's thoughts. So we'll address that. But the reason I wanted to do this was just this, Jay. Like you said, I think it's important, especially in this current moment, for people to focus a little bit more in the positivity that exists. And so I'm very proud of you, as a father, but also proud that you're, our financial life planning advisor as well. So I get a mixture of that. But
I think that's part of my purpose, though.
Absolutely. No, I think it's important for people to hear this. That's why I wanted to address it.
I forget what I was listening to, and I wrote it down. I didn't even thought about that'd be a good tattoo as a reminder. Somebody else on another podcast was kind of like the optimist, and they talked about we need lighthouses. We need people who, no matter what goes on, never falter from the positive energy, the optimism, and they can be that lighthouse that those who are losing that feeling can see and be drawn towards it.
Yeah.
So I think that I've always been optimistic. It's a part of my DNA, and I don't know how any other way to be. When a negative thought comes in my mind, And as soon as I recognize it, I'm like processing it, I'm feeling it, but then I'm looking to redirect my energy. Because my fear is that if I don't, then it's just going to compound.
Yeah.
The law of attraction is going to take over real quick and bring more negativity to me. So I don't say it and maintain this optimism from a place of trying to like force myself to believe it. Like, I don't know any other way to be. And I think that I am that way for a reason. And for sometimes that is to be that positive energy that people need, to give them a little bit more courage or a little bit more faith, because I think it's contagious.
Yeah, yeah. We need that grounding, and so just to end on this, and I did have kind of a quote from Warren Buffett. Oh, did Warren take some time when you were in Omaha?
No, he didn't see us. I tried to stalk his McDonald's, but I didn't see him.
You didn't see him that day? All right. But anyhow, I found this. It is a piece of advice that Warren Buffett provided, and actually it's he said to heed the lines from a Rudyard Kipling's classic poem, If, written in 1895. Mm-hmm. But the words are, just to kind of summarize what you did here a little bit, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to put that in here with our thought today, because I thought it was a good way to summarize this concern. And even though I carry some of this concern with me, it's just that part of me that is too thoughtful and trying to make sure that I'm understanding all aspects of it before I make a decision. And part of that is, like everything else, what you kind of grow up with. Mm-hmm. Like I've spoken before, grew up at a very good time in life, kind of the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Wonderful little part of the world that, yes, isolated us from a little bit of the real world. Wonderful family, wonderful friends. All of that was good, but at the same time, there was a lot that we didn't have. So now growing up, if you would, becoming an adult, doing what we've done to make our life what it is, there's also that little bit of when you now have something that you never had before, there's that concern of losing a little bit of that. And I think that's what drives me to where I've been pestering you here lately in the last, we'll just call it 6 months, about are we okay? Do we need to make any adjustments? I mean, that's where, I'm smart enough to know I'm not smart enough. Mm-hmm. I've got you from 2 levels to make sure things are right. And I hear you, and it's proven that way. We just outlined all this time that we've lived and made it through. Even though I still think things are a little different than these times. And my only concern, and I only say this, I'm not going to drag us through this anymore, but one of the differences from our times before, even though we had that situation with the bonds, there's this whole bit about, still the bond market and the treasuries that's lingering in the background, that who's the second largest holder of U.S. treasuries?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So I'm just saying that for the people who may be listening, they're not. And I think that's, for me, where some of the caution lies in, is that, hey, if they get tired of, us playing games with them, it's not so much about the products and the trade. It's I'm just going to take care of you by offloading by investments in your treasuries. Mm-hmm. And then what? Again, we don't know.
I mean, I don't think that is a situation that ends well for China,
for the world.
Either.
Well, it doesn't end well for
because
anybody.
Because we're so intertwined.
Right.
So they could do that, but so if you want to talk about like concern, of the stuff that's going on now, I find it more concerning about all of like the DEI stuff that's going on.
Yeah, that's
taking, Jackie Robinson's history in the military out, these books that are coming out of the libraries. To me, that's more troubling than all the financial stuff. The financial stuff will work itself out.
I agree with
Trying to erase history and minimize, groups of people, I don't understand anything behind that.
Yeah.
And I don't understand anybody who supports that and wants that. To me, that's more troubling, because in the first presidency, what really bothered me the most was the divide amongst people. I felt like, and maybe it's just because I was more aware of it, and maybe social media puts in front of us in my stage of life, but for the first time I ever felt like I could see and sense more hate in the country. And like that bothers me more, because I don't like having groups of people who don't like each other and those feelings. I don't know how you fix that. markets fix themselves out, businesses, innovation, like all that stuff is fixable. But when you start having us versus them, and like, I don't know how you fix that. That to me is what we should really be talking about, not the stupid markets.
Right.
Like, and I know money touches everything, but those are bigger problems because I think that drives more of a wedge, and like, I think that becomes more problematic for society.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you there. And as you said, we could have another 3 series on all of that, which again kind of does circle all around because it's interdependent. Because if you have all that happening, therein lies, a lot of troubles that could have a reverberate through the place, which is still going on, will continue to go on. And like I said, we can spend a lot of time on that, but we won't. But I'm with you. I'm still concerned more about that than I am the market. So I'm with you there. Just as, with a lot of other things, but that's where we go. But I think all of this, and I wanted to lead with that, not as a public service, but one to help if whoever may be listening in on us today, to hear that optimism, to also have some more context around some of the bad times, how it is parallel to what we've seeing today, understand a little better, and if they haven't yet, to reach out to talk to somebody. I know you do that naturally with your own clients, both personally, one-on-one conversations.
I've been really proud that we haven't had very many calls. And then on my weekly emails, I haven't even had that many responses. There's been a few. Like, I recorded a video, and I can see the analytics of it. And I think there's 150 emails on the email list. 16 people watched the video. Yeah. So that makes me feel good that, like, my clients trust, and either they're not paying as much attention or they're continuing to live their life and not losing too much.
Right. Well, I think that's attributed to a lot of things. One of which has to be you and what your clients know of you and have experienced with you through the years they have been a part of RLS Wealth. But I also just feel that you just have to feel good about that, and then the quality of the family members of RLS Wealth. That's a good sign. But you have to give yourself a little bit of a pat on the back, recognizing that's what you do, not just because of that, but you give the rundowns, right? Your RLS Wealth rundown. So anybody listening who happen to not to be your client, and the links you can put where they can get it.
They can't. You're not going to do that. No, that's only for clients.
That's not okay. Only for us. All right. But anyhow, just to say, this is natural. It's a good thing. We should work through it because I think it's important too. Which now leads us into where I wanted us to really talk a little bit about, which we have in some ways indirectly. But as I've been going through everything, and as I wrote Terry's thoughts yesterday, I've identified what I'm just calling the pillars of the Encore career, Encore phase of life. And that is control, comfort, and clarity. And so I'd like to talk just a little bit about each of those and what I'm seeing and recognizing, because I think it helps us examine ourselves a little deeper. And we've had this conversation throughout our next episode podcast here in my Terry's thoughts and some of the things you've even written about, is that the opportunity to be a better version of ourselves and live a better life. And for me, all of what I'm doing now is that hope of helping people who are thinking about retirement or beginning retirement like myself, or even those who've been in it for a while, to continue to look at retirement as a work in progress. That's where I switched a little bit of my thought about what we talk about today, is that it really is a work in progress. Because one of the things about the comfort level of this, the pillar of comfort, is, we kind of go into it that we think we should have a plan, which we should have a plan. There should be goals. We should always have that throughout our life. The comfort part of retirement should be that the planning that you've done and some of the adjustments that you make allow you to be comfortable with the life that you have, right? Which also means you plan for the unexpected. So we've just talked about a lot of the unexpected. And how do you live this pillar of comfort in a very turbulent moment? I think we gave that enough time rather than diving into it today. But
one comment on comfort, though, is I think you need to define your own definition of comfort. Same thing like with success. Like, don't look to what other people are doing to define what you find comfortable. Like, what is comfortable to you, and stick to that, because you can easily keep up with the Joneses when it comes to comfort.
Right.
So I think it's really important that as you're thinking about comfort, like defining what comfortable is for you. Like, we talk a lot about in like financial planning world is like, what's enough? Like, what is enough? And there's different definitions and like different things to think about it. There's dollars to think about, like how much money is enough, but then also like, what is enough? Like, what do you need to be happy? What do you need to be comfortable? And use that as your North Star. I don't think you can progress the way you talk about if you don't own your own definition of comfort.
Right. That's a great point. Specifically, as you're thinking about this phase of life as a lifestyle, right? I mean, you were living a certain lifestyle up until the point that you retired. Your hard work and effort, savings, planning, all of what you did to get to this point in life. This is a time when you come in, wanting to celebrate all of that. As we've talked about before, this is your celebration time. But as I've experienced and as we've talking about and I've written on, there is really a transition from that moment where you give up what you've lived up until whatever point in time you decide to call it, the end to the career life and come into this encore phase. But it really is a revitalization, an opportunity for us to take a look at a new vision of how we want to live our life. And I know I'm guilty of this, and that is we keep trying to, I'm going to say this, we're going to keep trying to live the life now like we've always lived our life. And for me, that's very pragmatic. There's planning. I have a tendency to kind of think through things, and if it doesn't happen the way I think, then in some ways I've fallen short. I think for me, that's my challenge of getting through and defining what you just said to do, define that comfort, that mindset of this. Not only is it a different time of life, yes, we have all the freedom. We have the opportunity to live our days the way we want to. Our schedules can be what we would like them to be. But there is a lot of transition to that, which we've addressed many times already in previous discussions of how do you feel that time? What do you feel it with? There is that euphoric feeling of where, after you've gone through it a couple of years and all of a sudden is, what do I do now? We talked about that a little bit last time, and I wrote on it in an episode before and Terry's thoughts about what now. So I think that comfort is important because it's a mindset that we have to have. But I look at that as a pillar because that comfort needs to be established of what's the desired lifestyle. But I want folks to understand that whatever you think that desired lifestyle is, it should be no different than what we've done throughout our life, and that is it's only good for a period of time. I mean, what's comfortable right now for me has been disrupted a little bit about current moment. It has been disrupted a little bit about those around us who have, passed on and moved away from this life to the next. And that makes you rethink. Again, that's just natural. But I think the comfort is a key pillar for us to just understand and create that living that we want to eventually get us to a point in time where we really are just sailing along. But then I don't know that it ever comes. And I think that's true mainly because I'm saying that we should also continue to want to learn and experience new. We come in thinking we have a plan, right? I mean, what is retirement? Basically for many of us, retirement is what we experienced, and that is through our eyes from everybody else, our parents, our relatives, our friends, neighbors, versus now, as we're seeing, and we've talked many times on, it's more of a new life, an opportunity to continue to explore who you are, be comfortable with who you are at any given time at this phase of life, and do the right things to make yourself, talk about what you're going to be like when you're 80 instead of what am I going to do when I'm in my 40s or 50s or 60s, right? So it's a different thing. The next pillar is clarity. Again, more wrapped around the ideas. Coming in, you have to have a little bit of a plan and a little bit of goals. I think that's still important, just again, like any part of life. But the clarity of this time of life is, again, we're not really sure what it is, right? Because just like throughout our life, we become an adult, we go off and start our career. If we get married, then if we have family and children, no one really gave us a manual. It's not like there's manuals, for the different phases of our life to tell us what to do. So
And even if there are now, there's books.
Oh, there's lots. There's always been books.
Those books and manuals are one person's experience.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make it right or wrong. It's what was their experience. It doesn't mean it's what's going to be yours. Going back to like, you adapt, you figure things out.
Yeah.
You make sacrifices, you make adjustments, and you just keep moving forward.
Yeah. And that's what I would encourage us to do in our Encore phase, is to recognize that if you thought you had to have a plan, it's important to. If you should indeed have goals and continue to adjust them, because that's just, I think, critical to our life as humans, as individuals, as a husband, as a father and grandfather, as a friend. I think that's important to keep everything moving and keep us available and keep us alive. But I don't think it's necessary to be so hard and cling to that, because I'm finding out, if I cling to it too hard, like I did in my early phases of life, you have a tendency, I think, to miss opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see where that happened throughout my life. I shouldn't allow that to happen to me in this time of life, mainly because, we have a little bit of mortality staring in front of us, and I know that's silly, because it just really is an acknowledgement of age thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't know what our timeline is. We've both experienced people throughout lives that have gone way too far early in life.
That's the funny thing. Mortality's always been staring you in the face.
Yeah. But
obviously,
as you get older,
we feel more
right.
close to it. But like,
yeah,
people die at all ages.
But it's crazy. Yeah, it is. But when you're at this phase of life, you live it a little bit more, because I think because you're here and you see, at least it seems to be, a lot more younger people are, becoming seriously ill or having terminal illnesses or are passing away for some reason. And I think that's just life in general, right? Mm-hmm. Just like we talked in one of the very early podcasts we did, I referenced a line from Grumpier Old Men, where the father, Burgess Meredith, is sitting on the couch and he tells his son, it's like, I think God forgot me.
Mm-hmm.
He's the last. Well,
mm-hmm.
that's just like my grandfather, your great-grandfather was. He was the last of his generation. And now I look at Aunt Lucy and Uncle Ray, they're kind of the last of their group too. So
mm-hmm.
at some point you've got to go, wait a minute,
mm-hmm.
when am I? But then again, we have those who have passed too early. So I think the clarity part of all this is critical for us too, but to look at that clarity as an opportunity to keep wanting to learn and experience and have a vision that you may have come into this phase of life with. Make it different is what I'm saying. Just keep making it different. And I'm feeling more at ease and comfortable of having those, if you would, I'll just call them momentary thoughts to come passing through my mind's eye and even in front of me that say, this is a time to do something different, be somebody different, not to just sit back. Because retirement isn't a time to sit back and just do nothing. As the
I think for a lot of your generation, the Encore phase is the time to go do the things you always wanted to do, but you couldn't do because that wasn't what you were told. Like, I think my generation, the younger generation, we're more interested in incorporating what we want into our lives now. We don't want to delay and wait. But I think your generation, like, you saw and witnessed and you were told, you go work, you save, you sacrifice, you put your time in, then you retire, and that's when you get to live. And there's probably a lot of things that people wanted to do or wanted to experience but didn't because it didn't fit that formula. So in the Encore phase, it's go be the version of yourself that you didn't get to, just to experience it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, like, to me, that's the authentic life. Like, what you're talking about is, even in the Encore phase, continuing to live your authentic life. Tap into your passions, your interests, explore different versions of yourself. The authentic life is an evolution, which is what you're describing. And it's an evolution because as you have new experiences, you see new possibilities. Whether that is you see and witness it yourself, or through this new experience, you meet somebody and they have a story and you should learn from their story and they did something you never thought you was even possible, and now it has your interest and you go try that. And I just think that if you quit thinking and quit overanalyzing and you've listened to your heart and follow it, like, you're going to be guided to the places that you're supposed to go. And sometimes that guidance will manifest in something super meaningful. And sometimes that guidance is you just had to experience doing that to know that that isn't the thing, and you can check that box and never think about it again.
Yeah.
There's a story that I butcher that basically father and son set off on this journey. I don't know if we talked about this podcast, and they had their map. So before technology had maps on our phones, and the map did not have a fork in the road, but they came to this fork in the road, and they didn't know which way to go. And so they both decided they were going to pray, and whatever God told them to do, they were going to do. So they go do their prayer, they come back, and the son says that God told him to take the path to the right, and the father said same thing. So they go down the path to the right, they're driving for a little while, and it's a dead end. And they're confused as to why God told them to go down. Well, they turn back, come back to the fork in the road. Now they go down the left. They're heading down the left, and now this is getting late in the night. It's in the desert, no gas stations around, and the gas gauge is starting to go. And just as they're starting to really get nervous and the check engine light, the gas light's coming on, off in the distance, they can see a light. And so they know that they're close. They're not going to run out of gas and be stuck. And the dad says to the son, I know the reason that God sent us down the right path first. We had to go down there to know that that was the wrong path, so we would stay on this path. Because what could have happened is if they went to the left and they were on it long enough, they would have second-guessed themselves because they didn't know if they chose right. It's uncertain, and turned around to go back down the right path, which was actually the wrong path, and now they're out of gas. Now they're stuck in the desert. So sometimes you follow these callings to go down a path that's the wrong path, so when you come back to the right, you know with conviction this is the right path and you can stay with it.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to follow those experiences, and it wasn't meant to be anything more than an experience, and you know that that's not right for you, so you don't have to worry about what if and think about it anymore, and you can pour more into the things that continue to come as interest. But it is an evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we've spoken, and is very true, and everybody listening in has experienced the same. I think that's exactly what life is, and what we've done our entire life is learn through our experiences, and part of failing is to learn. And we have to fail in order to keep learning. We don't like it because it's uncomfortable. As individuals, we don't like thinking that we failed.
And I think that's a change. I think that's a change in mindset as well. There is no failure.
Right.
I think the only quote unquote failure would be if you did not
try.
succeed and you did not reach your goal and you failed to learn anything, then I think that's the failure, or not doing it.
Right.
But I think that reframing it, okay, I'm going to try this thing, and even if it doesn't work out the way that I want it to, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to gain some type of knowledge that I may not know why right now, but in the future, it will make sense.
Yep.
And so it wasn't a failure. It was a learning lesson that didn't go the way that we wanted it to go, but it's not good or bad. And like nothing is good or bad until we assign a value to it. Like it's an event. It is something that happened, but it is not good or bad. It's just it.
Yeah.
And then we, in our thinking mind, assign a value of good or bad or whatever to it, and then it becomes that.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people to shift the perspective on what failure is and throw that word out. There's no failure.
Right. Except not trying.
Right.
And I think that I was going to use this a little different time, but this works out in a book. If anybody's looking for a decent book, it's called Halftime by Bob Buford. Really addresses the idea, as we spoke in our past podcast on falling upward, Richard Rohr, and kind of like the first half of life. This is very similar, but taken in a different perspective. But in here, to start at one of the chapters, he has a quote, and the quote is, "The real test of a man," and as always, right, it's always written for the man, but it also would be woman or man, "is not when he or she plays the role that he or she wants for herself, but when he or she plays the role destiny has for him or her." I think that's kind of a good thing, right?
It's the authentic life.
Yeah, there it is. There it is, the idea. And I think we have a little bit better perspective now in doing this Encore phase, back to having our clarity, having our comfort lead us to the opportunities that are in front of us, rather than just sitting back and putting up with where we're at. And living a time where we're just going through the basics again, which I think is an easy trap to fall in. I read an article that talks about the 1,000 hours of retirement, and it basically was talking about, the the pastime of Americans isn't what we think. It's not baseball. It's not this, that. It's actually just watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
And this article talks about the number of hours that we watch TV as
Mm-hmm.
Americans. So it, of course, segues into a retirement time of life that says, well, what makes you think retirement's going to be any different? You know, that 1,000 hours of watching TV should be something different.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads into, I think, what you've said about different generations. There's also been a study where individuals of your generation are taking mini retirements
Mm-hmm.
throughout their lives, kind of like sabbaticals.
Mm-hmm.
Or as you said, in my generation, you didn't see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, you may come upon somebody who decided, hey, I'm going to quit work and go off and do something when I'm 40 and then come back in. But that's not as often as we're seeing now. So I think that bodes well into the idea of that comfort and clarity are important. And the final pillar.
Before we get to the final one, let me get the camera.
Okay. So the final pillar after comfort and clarity is control. And this is the idea of, as always, you have control over your life. Have more comfort, if you would, in the control you have at this phase of your life, because you truly have the freedom to run your schedule, to look at your time, to make those adjustments. You have more choices, I think, in this phase of life that you may not have necessarily had in earlier phases. Not that they weren't there, it may be because you chose, which is your choice, not to do something. And that could be for legitimate reasons. When you have a family, you would like to do some things, but your choices are ignore your family or go do this.
Mm-hmm.
You have choices to make when you're developing your career. Again, you can decide to go full hog into that career, but then what does that do to other portions of your life or relationships that you have? And so I think now, though, those choices can be a little bit more advantageous to you because you can do it, because it's a little bit more just you now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a time for you to help yourself. Yes, I still have to worry about some of the choices I make with Mom and the time that we share, because my choice is still based a lot on what's the impact of family.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first impact to Mom? What's the next impact to where we are as families? Where does that impact our time around the grandkids and schedules? And people have said to Mom and I, you're spending more time with your grandkids than you may have been with your children. And we said, well, that's probably true, but most importantly, part of that is driven because we have 5 grandkids,
Mm-hmm.
and they each have their own schedules.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, when it was just Justin and Kristen, our lives were driven around their schedules, and 2 children are certainly different than 5 grandchildren, and a son and a daughter are different than having 4 grandsons and a granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
But that's our choice. That's where we want to live our life, and that just makes it easier for us to enjoy this time that we have, because now I'm very comfortable, back to the pillar,
Mm-hmm.
of knowing that going to do something now I can do and not worry about what's piling up on the emails,
Mm-hmm.
what's piling up and what do I need to do. Now it's like I don't have that concern,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a good freedom to have. But it's more about also not making sure that people are beginning to suck your time away, because that still can happen. How do you
Mm-hmm.
control that time? You can still give a little bit too much of it up. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you addressed this very well when you talked about you have a need to take a look at some of the relationships that you have, and you have to identify those relationships that aren't worth your time anymore, or
Mhm.
once upon a time they were, or you thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
But now, time is valuable, and where do you spend that time? Also, don't put that time into negative energy.
Mm-hmm.
Circle back around, early start of our conversation
Mhm.
this morning. You can't put a lot of time into that. You have to give some attention to it, but be careful how we do that. And I
Mhm.
think it's more critical today in the Encore phase to be careful with that time, because you want it to be yours. That's why you're here. And that time should be yours to redefine yourself, to take a moment, take a breath. And I think also recognize in this control factor that it's okay to say to yourself, I don't know what I'm doing next, or how do I feel this time, or how do I feel this void, or what do we do about purpose at this phase? Those are all transitional items that become real. So folks listening in to this for the first time, I think you have to recognize your transition to this life in the Encore phase will bring you those moments of of doubt. And in doing so, it's important to recognize those are okay, but don't bog down in them, because then you'll destroy the happiness that can happen from that. So I think it's important to recognize that and take the opportunity to keep learning and enjoying, experiencing, embrace your life so that you can find out what that authentic life is. And as the quote just mentioned, what's destiny have for us? We don't know. Still take the wrong paths, because we always will learn something from those wrong paths. And all of that's very critical to continuing our self-development. And I think that becomes critical. So those three pillars, again, are comfort, control, and clarity. They're all very intertwined and important for us, not just as individuals, but I think as people at this phase of life, I think more than others. So on that note, just always keep remembering that we never should quit searching, never give up, and always keep looking for that greater purpose. So Jay, again, always appreciate your time. This is always enjoyable, and we'll look forward to the next episode.
Sounds good.
All right, have a good one.
All right.